Hello everybody, what is happening? In today's video, I'm going to tell you how I went from being a very staunch, very harsh critic of Harley Davidson motorcycles to a Harley Davidson rider and owner. Stay tuned. Alright, so a little bit about me. I'm 41 years old. I've been riding for 13 years. I've owned 11 motorcycles. This is my 11th motorcycle. It's a 2020 Softail Standard. I also own a 2014 KTM 1290 Super Duke R. For 13 years, I've ridden primarily high-performance motorcycles. And for 13 years, I've been a pretty harsh critic of Harley Davidson motorcycles. And now I own one. Strange how that works. I guess you could call me a hypocrite. So why was I so critical of Harley Davidson motorcycles? Well, I guess it's because it wasn't so much that I was just critical for no particular reason, but it was more of a response to Harley Davidson claims, or at least claims from Harley Davidson riders. I spent a lot of time on motorcycle forums back when I started riding, because I was just absorbing so much information. And on forums, there's a lot of common themes you see. You know, what motorcycle should I get? What should I get for my first motorcycle? What motorcycle should I get next? I'm looking at this motorcycle and this motorcycle. Can you help me decide? And if you follow those threads long enough, folks will recommend one type of motorcycle and other folks will recommend another type of motorcycle. And it usually just ends up in a pissing contest about which bike is best. Now, since I started out riding Kawasaki's and Yamahas, riding sport bikes, I tended to side with the folk that recommended big four Japanese motorcycles. And it wasn't really because I knew anything about them versus, say, Harley Davidson motorcycles. It's that I had one, so I was biased, and I thought, well, I started out on one. It worked great for me. I have them. I love them. So why wouldn't other people love them? So in these pissing contests, people would say things and I would absorb it. You know, things like Harley Davidsons are a great way to turn gasoline into noise without the side effect of horsepower. Or Harley Davidson for when you want yesterday's technology at tomorrow's prices. And over the 13 years of my riding, as I became more knowledgeable about motorcycles, I applied that knowledge to what I knew about Harley Davidsons. You know, kind of like this is a 650-pound bike with a single disc rotor on the front. It has non-adjustable suspension. It only has 3.4 inches of travel in the rear. This is a 1750cc motor, and they won't publish the horsepower figures on it because they're so abysmally low compared to other motorcycles with half the displacement. So, you know, like, I started off early with a bias for sport bikes and high-performance motorcycles, and the more knowledgeable I got, the more that bias grew because I compared everything to high-performance motorcycles. Like I said, my criticism of Harley was primarily internet-based because the folks that I interacted with one-to-one or in a personal basis, I never had the sort of problems that I had with folks online. People online are a lot more vocal. In person, ride around with Harley people and they don't really give a crap if you're on a Harley Davidson or not. And they don't say, you know, hey, you should ditch that bike and get a Harley Davidson, which is something they might say online. And the sport bike people don't say, hey, you should ditch that Harley Davidson and get something that makes some horsepower, like they would online. So this sort of feud was mostly online. And of course, I would echo it in real life, mostly to non-rider folk, because non-riders are always like very curious about you and your ride. You know, if you come into work with a helmet and a jacket, people will ask you what you ride. You tell them, I ride a Triumph Speed Triple, and they're like, what's that? Is that a crotch rocket? No, it's not a crotch rocket. So is it like a Harley? No, it's not like a Harley. Have you ever had a Harley? No, I've never had a Harley. You should get a Harley. Okay. So like a lot of lay people are sort of in the same camp as Harley owners, because Harley has this reputation of just being the best motorcycle. Kind of like the only motorcycle out there. There's Harleys, and then there's like everything else. And so a lot of lay people, especially depending regionally, like for instance, I lived in Texas for a while, I've lived in Mississippi for a while, and you know, if somebody didn't ride a Harley, they knew somebody who rode a Harley. And they didn't know people who rode Yamahas or Kawasaki's. It's all about Harley in a lot of areas. So anyways, when these lay people would ask me why I don't have a Harley, I would explain to them, well, I prefer a high-performance machine. Something that has good suspension, good brakes, has a chassis that can handle corners and braking and can put power to the ground without losing traction. I like technology like traction control and anti-lock brakes. And obviously I like horsepower and I like going fast. Harleys don't have horsepower and they don't go fast. So, like a lot of my co-workers, friends, and family, also have heard my criticisms of Harley. So, what made me change? Well, first of all, I never really disliked Harleys terribly that much. You know, like I said, most of my criticism of Harley was in response to, you know, the claims, or at least the insinuated claims, that Harley Davidson is the one and only motorcycle that people should ride. That it's good for all riders, and it's good for all types of riding. If you want to go fast, you can get a Harley. If you want to ride on the highways for long trips, you get a Harley. If you want to just cruise around the boulevard, you get a Harley. If you love the twisties, you get a Harley. If you want to go on a long adventure, you get a Harley. The Harley does everything. And while it's true that Harley does do everything, they don't do everything the best. But anyways, let's get back on topic here. So I've never been deep down inside a hater of Harley Davidsons. It was just a response to attitudes, beliefs, attitudes, and values of other people who held Harley Davidsons in very high esteem. So nothing really changed my mind, so to speak. It's just that the first time I got on a motorcycle, I knew without a doubt, as many of you probably know, that riding is going to be something that you're going to do until the day you die, or until you can't ride anymore. And even when you can't ride, you're going to be like, I'm going to get a trike. It wasn't really like, oh, I had this big change of heart and now I'm a Harley Davidson guy. No, it's more like, as a lifelong rider, it was just inevitable that one day I would own a Harley. Just like it's inevitable that one day I will own a Ducati. I've never owned a Ducati before, but if I'm going to be riding for the next 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, and Ducati's still around, chances are I will own a Ducati. Chances are I'll own an Indian. Chances are I'll own, let's see, what haven't I owned? A Suzuki. I haven't owned a Suzuki. I will probably own a Suzuki at some point. It's not like, oh, I did this entire flip-flop that I hated Harley Davidson. I talked like I hated Harley Davidson. But it was just more of something that was inevitable, that it was going to happen eventually. So the real question is not why did I change so much, or why change my mind. It's more like, why now? I didn't get a Harley Davidson earlier on because, you know, I just still had this bias. I was surrounded by people who knew my bias and my passion for high performance. But over the last couple of years, I've moved away from all my friends. I've moved away from my career. I've moved from Maryland to the Baltimore area, away from all my riding buddies to Mississippi. I lived there for a little while. Now I'm in eastern Idaho. Don't know anybody here except for the people at the Harley dealership. And so I'm a little bit freed from the social pressures of sticking to, you know, what people believe my attitude was. So that was one reason that now was the time. Another reason is that when I started doing research about Harleys, about the current models, well, I discovered what most Harley Davidson riders know. The current lineup has a new engine it was new in 2017, so it's not super new, but it's updated from the last iteration. And looking back at Harley Davidson's history, you know, a new engine for Harley is a pretty big deal because they usually keep the same engine for a very, very long time. You know, like the Sportsters have the Evo engine, and that came out in the 80s. I can't remember, 84, 86, something like that. They've been using the same engine, not exactly the same, but the same platform for 30 years. So, or 30 plus years. So, you know, discovering that this is a new engine, I was a little curious, so I kept on digging. There's a lot of neat things about it that intrigued me, about how it's more balanced and doesn't shake as much as the old engine. It's got a lot more power. I don't like it when cows run. More displacement. It's the old, the previous model, Big Twin, I think was a 103. I'm not 100% sure. They had some 103s, some 110s. I don't know a lot about the previous generation, which is called the Twin Cam. This is the Milwaukee 8. Big motors, big powerful motors. But anyway, as I kept on doing research, I just became more intrigued by kind of the cool stuff about this bike. And also I learned that in 2018 they updated the chassis for the Softail, and that it's, I don't know, it's a whole bunch, it's a lot stiffer than the old one. It's got, you know, better torsional rigidity or whatever the specs are, but it's like, apparently it's, you know, they claim that it's night and day from the old chassis, and like way better than the Dyna. So all that stuff got me curious enough to go down to the Harley Davidson dealership and sit on the bikes. And I talked to the salesperson, and he told me some stuff about it. Like, I didn't know that Harley Davidson finally had 6-speed transmissions. Like, I don't know how long they've had 6-speed transmissions, but I've always just assumed that they've had 5-speed transmissions because, you know, I never really dug that deep into what they have. It was enough to get me interested in riding. And so I rode one, and of course, I enjoyed myself. A lot of things surprised me. Oh, look out for the dog. Don't attack me, dog. Dogs. There's a lot of things that surprised me when I rode it. For instance, the brakes. I don't quite understand how the brakes work, because this is a 650 plus pound bike, you know, over 700 pounds with me on it, or 800 pounds, almost 800 pounds with me on it. It has a single disc up front with a 4-piston caliper, but I only use 2 fingers on the brake. Like, I don't have to use all 4 fingers to brake. I can still brake with 2 fingers, and I stop plenty fast. I don't know how that voodoo works, but it surprised me when I test rode it. I was like, wow, you know, I thought these brakes were junk. I thought I was going to be scared coming to a stoplight or a stop sign or trying to slow down, that I would just be mashing the brakes with all 4 fingers and then also using the rear brake. I never use the rear brake, but my preconceived notion about the brakes was wrong. So yeah, so that's how I went from being a harsh Harley Davidson critic to an owner slash rider. And I do also want to say that I have not turned into like a Harley Davidson advocate. Like, I think Harley Davidson makes good bikes. They're the right bike for the certain type of rider and a certain type of ride. But they're not the right bike for everything. So, I'm not going to be... hopefully I'm not going to be one of those people that says a Harley Davidson is the be-all, end-all motorcycle. If you want to go fast, Harley Davidson might not be for you. If you have some super twisties that you love carving, Harley Davidson might not be for you. But for cruising, for chilling, I have not had a better bike for just cruising around, this Harley Davidson. So yeah, that's it. That's why I went from being a Harley Davidson hater, critic, to a Harley Davidson owner. So let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video if you liked it, and feel free to subscribe, and thank you for watching.